Did you know that even though the Nazis were defeated in 1945, the propaganda that they created was so effective, it was copied worldwide, but especially by one political party here in America, to the detriment of our country. That's one of the two topics I'll be talking about today. Welcome. On the show today, we'll be talking about these two topics: social protections in the Netherlands and Nazi propaganda at work in American politics. In the second of three segments, what I call Propaganda 101. But let's start with the Netherlands and social protections in the Netherlands. Let me give you an overview. Let me start by saying that the social protections in that country is really extensive. I'll just go over a few of them. Now, unlike in America, where social protections are very limited and it's tough to get onto those protections, a few Dutch citizens fall through the cracks in their country, at least in economic terms. Now, besides universal health care, which is inexpensive compared to the American healthcare system here, the Netherlands has these government programs: a universal pension system, a monthly government payment to families with children, sick leave, maternity leave, and long-term care benefits. And all these benefits are paid for through the national tax system. Let's go into a detailed view now of each of these programs. Let's start with the universal healthcare system in that country. It's based on a system of private providers. Let's watch this video clip and come back and talk about it.
The Dutch government makes sure that industry is regulated and fair. Professor Alan Enthoven of Stanford authored the managed competition model the Dutch have embraced.
One of the things the Dutch do that we should do is have standardized coverage contracts, so there's no tricky exclusion, no confusion.
Although the system is based on private insurers, the government makes certain that no one is refused coverage based on age, gender, or pre-existing condition. University of Texas professor Pauline Rosenau has written extensively on the Dutch healthcare system.
And it's all part of what's outlined as the basic health insurance policy that the government, first of all, has an entire department that tells the insurance companies what they have to cover, and then sees to it and checks up that they are covering those things.
6.5% of income goes to health insurance in the Netherlands. Those who cannot afford that have their insurance costs subsidized by the government. The government, through an insurance pool, also compensates insurance companies for signing up people with poor health records or pre-existing conditions. All of this costs less than U.S. health care. The Dutch spend $3,527 a person on health care, while the U.S. spends $7,290. It is 9.8% of GDP in the Netherlands versus 16% in the U.S.
The Netherlands has one of the finest healthcare systems in all of Europe. And while many medical services do have out-of-pocket expenses, the monthly cost of basic Dutch medical insurance after a $400 yearly deductible is cheap compared to what we Americans pay. It's only about $150 a month after the conversion rate. And if you're a low-income Dutch citizen, you get an allowance from the government that covers most of your premium. And healthcare for all Dutch children under the age of 18 is free. Everyone has the right to choose whatever doctor, provider they want, and insurers have to cover everyone for the same flat fee. All this is possible because the government regulates the Dutch companies' healthcare plans and the quality of their coverage. There's that dirty word again, regulation, The word regulation is the reason we don't have affordable healthcare in this country, in America. Because all the Republicans and some Democrats have demonized that word because they don't want any restrictions placed on corporations, since that's where they get most of their campaign money from, right? And they don't want to stop the gravy train. Let me get back to the Netherlands. Other benefits that the Netherlands provide their citizens: they have a pension. Parents receive a monthly benefit check from the government for equivalent of about $350 for children up to 17 years old. Dutch women receive maternity leave that lasts 16 weeks at full pay. When an employed person becomes sick, the employer is obligated to continue paying up to 70% of that employee's salary for a maximum of 2 years. Then there's a long-term care benefit. That government benefit, just like all the others, is paid through the national tax system. And citizens get reimbursed from the government for the care of the elderly, the handicapped, or those with chronic health conditions. It includes things like personal care, helping with washing or dressing, medical care, whatever it takes to treat your illness, and transportation and supportive care. So, are you jealous yet? Huh? Okay, look, this is a takeaway from the story. I keep discussing these great benefits that other countries have, specifically the ones in Europe and Scandinavian countries, because there is no reason that we can't have these great benefits ourselves here in America. All of us have to pay for health care anyway, and most of us will need sick leave, maternity leave, and long-term care services as we age. Like for us Americans to have a chance to lower our healthcare costs, we first need to stop listening to and believing Republican Party propaganda about how evil socialism, taxes, and government regulations are. So keep all that in mind as I now transition into the next show segment. Okay, this next show segment is all about Nazi propaganda techniques being used in 2020 America. Now, before I dive into the specifics, it's important to understand some German history. If you know anything about Nazi Germany, you know that propaganda during those Nazi years permeated every aspect of German society. That included radio, the press, movies, newsreels, theater, music, art exhibits, books, and sports. Propaganda, basically telling lies, was embedded in all information streams in German society during those years. And by and large, the lies that were told through this propaganda system worked beautifully in shepherding many German people into believing and agreeing with the Nazi ideology to a great extent. Well, it seems that the Nazi propaganda playbook has been dusted off and has been used by the Republican Party in America for many decades. Let's take a detailed view now into Nazi propaganda and its use in America. So, why is it being used in America? Because it's really effective. It was really effective back then. And the tools they used back then are just as effective now. Okay? The propaganda was really effective at fooling people to get them to think or do whatever it is you want them to do. For example, you have large numbers of Republican voters who believe the president when he says that mass fraud had taken place in the past election, even though no proof of election fraud was ever found. That didn't stop them from believing every word he said. Okay? You have patients in hospitals, sick and dying of COVID-19, but even as they are dying, they're saying that they're dying of something else because the president said it was a hoax. And then there's the word socialism. That word has been demonized for decades by the Republican Party, and they got their base voters to hate it as well, even though very few of their base voters really know what it means. In fact, democratic socialism actually means helping the people. And the U.S. government has also been made to seem problematic, or as an institution that should not be trusted. And you can thank Ronald Reagan and his administration for starting that propaganda about how you should never trust the government for anything. Okay, so there are some other similarities. Let's talk about Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Dr. Joseph Goebbels was the propaganda minister of the Nazi regime. And here are some of his quotes. Now, as I go through these, notice the distinct similarities between this Nazi ideology and what the Republicans want us to believe. First quote from Dr. Joseph Goebbels. If you tell a lie long enough, it becomes a truth. End of quote. As in, the government is a problem, it only hurts citizens, and government regulations are bad because they kill jobs. Okay? Americans have heard this from Republicans since the 80s. A second Nazi quote from Dr. Joseph Goebbels. The bigger the lie, the more it will be believed. End of quote. Many Americans today believe the QAnon crackpot conspiracy theories, and to many voters, Trump's election loss was based on widespread voter fraud, even though no fraud was ever found. Third quote. The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over again. End of quote. What's the similarities to today? Well, socialism, government regulations, radical liberal agenda, and any kind of tax has always been drummed into us that those are all bad. Right? Fourth quote. Propaganda must provide the people an outlet for their anger by giving them specific targets. End of quote. Well, what's going on today? Well, Republican propaganda these days, what do? they point to illegal immigrants, gays, and people of color as being the targets of their basest hatred. As in, those are people trying to steal their jobs, or somehow they're morally degenerate. Folks, things never used to be like this. Most of us raised in the 50s, 60s, and 70s believe this: that credibility is king, and the truth will always win out. Well, in 2020 America, you can throw that thinking out the window. Logic in America has become perverted. It's as if we're living in 1933 Germany. Have a look at these two Republican posters from 1956. It's really hard to believe it's the same party. This is the takeaway, folks, from this segment. The Republican Party has changed their party's priorities 180 degrees. These days, they only represent the interest of the 1% and corporate America, and that's it. They don't want middle or lower income Americans to prosper anymore. In fact, quite the opposite. Using a variety of propaganda techniques, Republicans have been very successful at getting Americans, especially their base voters, to vote against their own economic self-interest. For example, the Koch brothers sponsored something called the Libre Initiative. That was a food distribution program combined with propaganda that targeted the Latino population to get them to think that a higher minimum wage will actually hurt them. No joke. Check it out, the Libre Initiative. Also, middle-class Republican voters didn't want to sign up for Obamacare when it first came out. Some still don't, because of the word Obama. Right? And that's the end result of carefully crafted propaganda. Well, that's the show for today. Next week I'll conclude the Propaganda 101 series by having a look at what life is like for many low-information Republican voters when they actually believe Republican propaganda and vote accordingly. If you like the topics that I present on the show, please consider subscribing. In any event, always remember, you deserve the government you vote for.